The night the tornado took my house, I thought the worst was over. But I was wrong. Standing in the rain, with nothing left but a small suitcase in my trembling hands, I believed family would open their doors. I never imagined the storm outside would be gentler than the one waiting behind my son's front door. That was the night I learned, silence can hurt louder than thunder. Thank you for watching and staying with me. It truly means a lot to me. And I would love to know where you are watching from, so please tell me down in the comments. My name is Ruth, and I have lived in Maine for most of my life, in a little house that held more than just walls. It held years of memories, love, and the sound of laughter that used to fill every corner. That house was built when I was still young, and through every winter storm, spring rain, and quiet summer evening, it stood strong like a promise I thought would never be broken. I raised my son there, cooked in that small kitchen with its chipped countertops, and watched the maple tree outside my window grow taller every year. Just like him. Everything in that place carried a piece of my life. From the old rocking chair my late husband used to sit in, to the faded photographs that lined the hallway. Each one whispering stories of years I'll never get back. I never thought I'd see that home torn apart in front of my eyes. But that night, nature reminded me how fragile even the strongest things can be. Still, as I stood in the ruins, holding that single suitcase, I carried something deeper than loss. I carried the hope that family, at least, would never close its doors on me. I held on to that thought like a small light in the darkness, never realizing that the hardest storm wasn't the one outside, but the one waiting in the eyes of someone I trusted. When the tornado came, it wasn't just wind and rain, it was a roar that felt alive, tearing through everything I had built. I remember clutching my old photo album to my chest while the walls shook around me, praying the roof would hold just a little longer. In those moments, I wasn't thinking about fear, only about the faces in those pictures, the family I believed would always be there for me. When it was over, the house was gone, splintered like it had never stood at all. But I was still breathing, standing in the mud with nothing left but the clothes on my back and a heart full of disbelief. I told myself it didn't matter, that I could start over, because I had my son, and surely a mother would never be turned away by her own blood. I remember the weight of the night settling on my shoulders as I stood there looking at what was left of my home. And though the air was heavy with damp earth and broken wood, what I felt most was the ache of being alone. I picked up the small suitcase I had managed to save and told myself it would be all right. That all I needed to do was call my son, the boy I raised with everything I had, the one I believed would never let me fall. When he answered the phone, my voice shook more than I wanted it to, but he said I could come, and that was enough to make me believe I was walking toward safety. I drove through the night, my hands gripping the wheel as the wipers fought the last of the rain, and for a moment I let myself imagine the warmth of his house, the way he might hold me, the way his wife might offer a blanket and tell me I was safe. The closer I got, the more I whispered to myself that family doesn't need an invitation, that love would be waiting behind that door. I carried that hope like a shield, even though a quiet part of me was already afraid of what I might find on the other side. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the lights inside were still on. And for a moment, my heart lifted just enough to make me believe everything would be all right. I sat in the car for a few seconds, listening to the rain tapping against the windshield, letting the engine's quiet hum calm the storm that was still roaring inside me. I thought of all the nights I had stayed awake when he was little, how I worked double shifts just to make sure he had everything he needed, how I'd stood on cold porches in the middle of winter waiting for him to come home safe. It was that love that made me step out of the car with my old suitcase and walk up the path, the soft glow of the porch light wrapping around me like a promise. I could see him through the window, moving toward the door, and I took a deep breath, expecting to feel arms around me, to hear the words, "You're safe now, Mom." But when the door opened, it wasn't warmth that greeted me, it was a stillness that made the night colder. His eyes didn't shine with comfort, they flickered with hesitation. And behind him, she stood with crossed arms, lips pressed thin, as if my presence had already disturbed something precious. And then came the words that didn't need to be shouted to break me. He said he wanted privacy, and that she didn't want me there. The sound of rain hitting the ground filled the silence after his voice faded. And for the first time that night, it wasn't the storm outside making me tremble. It was the storm behind that door, the kind I never thought I'd face in my own family. I stood there in the rain, holding on to that old suitcase, as if it were the last piece of my life still holding me upright. And in that quiet moment, it felt like the world was slowly folding in on itself. The water ran down my face, but the sting in my chest had nothing to do with the cold. I looked at him, my own son, standing in the doorway that I once thought would always be open to me, and I waited for him to change his mind, to call me in, to say that what I heard wasn't what he meant. But the only sound was the steady fall of rain on the steps between us. I thought of the nights I spent sitting beside his bed when he was sick, the way I taught him to stand tall even when life was unkind, and all the times I told him that no matter how old he grew, this world could be cruel, but family was supposed to be different. Now, I was the one standing in the cold, on the outside looking in, and the warmth I had imagined on my way here was nowhere to be found. His wife didn't speak a word, but her silence carried more than enough, a quiet approval of every word he had said. And when he slowly closed the door, not slamming it but letting it fall shut like something final, I felt the sound echoed deeper than any thunder. I didn't cry out, I didn't beg, I didn't ask why. I simply turned away, letting the rain soak through my coat as I walked back to the car, my heart heavy, my breath unsteady, and my steps slow. I sat behind the wheel with my hands shaking, not because of the storm, but because I had just realized that the home I thought would be there no longer existed for me. It was a different kind of loss, quieter, sharper, the kind that doesn't leave broken wood behind, only broken trust. I sat there in the car with the rain still falling, the sound of it steady against the roof, like a reminder that the night wasn't done with me yet, and for a long time, I couldn't even bring myself to start the engine. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles pale, and I stared through the fogged windshield at the house that no longer felt like a place I belonged. My heart kept whispering that he would come back out, that he'd call my name, that this was some mistake he would make right. But minute after minute passed, and the only light I saw was the faint one in their living room. Warm and soft, but not meant for me. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, and everything I had held in since the storm finally came crashing down. Not as loud sobs, but as silent, shaking breaths that hurt more than any wind could. I had spent a lifetime believing that no matter how bad things got, family would be the one place where love didn't have to be earned, where doors would always open without question. But in that moment, I realized that sometimes the people you love the most can make you feel like you have nowhere in the world to stand. I thought about the years I had given, the sacrifices no one saw, the quiet battles I fought to make sure he never went without, and all of it suddenly felt like it had been swept away with the storm. I wiped my face with trembling hands and opened the old wallet I had carried for decades, the leather soft and worn from years of holding on to things I couldn't let go of. Inside, tucked behind fading receipts and an old photograph, was a phone number I never erased, a number that had lived through time the way some memories do, too stubborn to disappear. Harold. I whispered his name to myself, and it almost startled me how familiar it still sounded after all these years. I hadn't spoken to him in so long, but I could still remember the way he used to smile at me under the autumn trees, back when the world felt wide and kind. My fingers hovered over the numbers, and for a moment I wondered if he would even remember me, if calling him after all this time would make any sense. But sitting in that car, soaked and unwanted, with everything I knew behind me in ruins, I realized I had nothing else to lose. My hands were still shaking as I pressed the numbers one by one, my heart beating louder than the rain. When the line began to ring, I closed my eyes and held my breath like I was waiting for the world to change. And when I heard his voice on the other end, steady and warm, something inside me finally stopped breaking. The moment I heard his voice, it felt like something inside me unclenched, as if the storm I'd been holding in finally had a place to rest. It had been so many years since we last spoke, and yet his tone hadn't changed. It was still deep, calm, and warm in the way that made me feel seen, the way I hadn't felt in so long. I didn't even know where to begin, and for a few seconds, I couldn't speak. Just listening to the quiet sound of him breathing on the other end, steady and patient, like he somehow knew I needed that silence before the words came. I told him everything, not all at once but in pieces, my voice cracking as I spoke about the storm, the house, and finally the moment my own son turned me away. There was no pity in his voice, no rush, no judgment, only a stillness that felt like someone gently holding broken things without trying to fix them too quickly. He asked me where I was, and before I could even explain, he said he would come to me. No hesitation, no questions, just certainty. That single moment felt like the ground beneath my feet had steadied again. I gave him the address, my voice still trembling, and when I hung up the phone, the quiet in the car felt different. It was no longer filled with the weight of rejection, but with something I hadn't felt since before the storm began. Hope. I looked down at the phone in my hand, the same phone that had held nothing but bad news for weeks. And for the first time in a long time, it had carried something good. My hands were still cold, but my heart wasn't as heavy anymore, and though the rain kept falling, it didn't sound quite so cruel. I watched the street ahead of me, the headlights of passing cars slicing through the darkness, each one making my chest tighten a little less. I kept remembering the way he used to look at me back when we were young, before life turned into responsibility and distance, and the thought of seeing him again after so many years made my breath unsteady. I didn't know what he'd say, or what would come of this night, but what I did know was that someone still cared enough to come for me, someone who didn't need an explanation to open their arms. In that quiet car, surrounded by rain and darkness, I finally felt like I wasn't completely alone anymore. I sat there waiting, the rain still falling in that steady rhythm that had become part of the night, and each passing minute felt slower than the one before it. I didn't know what it would be like to see him again after so many years, whether it would feel like meeting a stranger or coming home to something familiar. My hands rested in my lap, still damp and cold, but my mind was no longer circling the pain at that door. Instead, it was reaching back to memories I thought I had buried. Memories of warm summer nights, of quiet walks after school, of a time when I used to believe that love was simple and kind. I whispered his name once, just to hear how it sounded after all this time, and it almost felt like I was 17 again, standing under the maple tree that used to be our meeting place. Then, in the distance, I saw a pair of headlights cutting through the rain, steady and bright, and something in me stilled. My breath caught in my chest as the black SUV slowed down and pulled up behind my car. I watched the door open, and there he was, stepping out as if time had folded in on itself. He was older now, of course, but his presence was still the same, strong and sure, like someone who had never forgotten how to stand steady, even when life tried to knock him down. He walked toward me with quiet steps, the rain touching his coat but not slowing him, and in that moment, the world outside my window didn't feel so harsh anymore. I opened my door slowly, and the cold air rushed in, but it didn't sting the way it had earlier. He reached out, wrapped his coat around my shoulders, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel the chill of the storm pressing against my bones. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me with eyes that had known me before the years had a chance to harden me, before responsibilities had pulled us apart. There was no judgment in his gaze, no questions about why I was here, just understanding, the kind that doesn't need words to be felt. I could see the porch light from my son's house spilling out faintly, and I knew they were watching, but I didn't turn my head. In that quiet space between the rain and the sound of his breath, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the world shifted beneath my feet. It wasn't just comfort, it was being seen. It was someone showing up without needing to be begged. And as I stood there, wrapped in his coat, with the rain falling softly around us, I felt like the night that had broken me was slowly giving way to something I didn't dare hope for a few hours earlier. A beginning I never saw coming. He stood there holding me in the quiet way a person does when words would only get in the way, and I could feel the warmth of his coat seeping into my skin, softening the edges of the night that had felt too sharp to breathe through. For a long moment, we didn't speak. We just stood there under the rain. Two people who had walked through different lives but somehow found their way back to the same place. His hand was steady on my shoulder, and there was a stillness in his eyes that told me I didn't have to explain a single thing. Then he leaned closer, just enough that I could hear his voice clearly over the soft drumming of the rain, and he whispered those 4 words that changed everything. "You're coming home now." The way he said it wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It was calm and sure, and it wrapped around me like a promise I didn't even know I was waiting for. My breath caught in my chest as those words sank in, and something inside me that had been bent and bruised began to straighten again. I turned my head slightly, and through the glow of their window, I saw the outline of my son and his wife standing there in their warm house, watching. Their faces were hard to read, but it didn't matter anymore. The part of me that had once ached for their acceptance went quiet. I didn't feel small or unwanted in that moment. I felt seen, and not because I had begged for it, but because someone who had known me long before I carried these years on my shoulders had chosen to be there. I could feel the weight of my suitcase pulling at my arm, the same bag that had carried what little was left of the life I'd built. But in that moment, it didn't feel so heavy anymore. He took it from me without asking, the way you do when you've known someone long enough to read their silences. And he placed it gently in the back of the car. The rain kept falling, soft and steady, but its bite had faded. I took one last look at the house, not because I hoped they would change their minds, but because I needed to let the hurt settle where it belonged, in the past. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. He opened the door for me like it was the most natural thing in the world, and as I stepped into the car, I felt something shift, a quiet sense of dignity sliding back into a place I thought I had lost forever. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and for the first time that night, the sound didn't make me flinch. It made me breathe. As the car began to move, I watched the house grow smaller in the rearview mirror, and with every turn of the wheels, the distance between me and that rejection grew. It wasn't just a ride away from a house. It was a ride toward something I had almost forgotten how to believe in. The feeling of being chosen, not out of duty, but out of care. I sat there in the warmth, listening to the rain against the windows, my heart still fragile, but no longer alone. As the car moved through the night, the rain followed us like a quiet companion, but it no longer sounded like something trying to drown me. It sounded softer, almost distant, as if the storm had finally accepted that it no longer owned me. I kept my eyes on the window, watching the small drops slide down the glass, each one catching a bit of light before disappearing into the dark. The longer we drove, the more that heavy feeling in my chest began to lift, and the air around me didn't feel so thick anymore. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe without that tightness sitting at the back of my throat. I glanced over at him, and there was something so steady about the way he kept his eyes on the road, not asking anything, not forcing me to talk, just being there like someone who understood that silence can be its own kind of comfort. I thought about how strange life can be, how one door can close so cruelly, while another, one you thought was long forgotten, opens without hesitation. He turned down a quiet road lined with tall trees, their wet branches bending gently in the wind, and I could smell the faint scent of pine drifting through the air vents. It reminded me of younger days, of Sunday walks when we didn't have a care in the world, when the biggest worry I had was whether the rain would ruin my dress. The car finally slowed as we turned into a long driveway, and through the mist I saw warm lights spilling out from a house that looked like it had been waiting, not for anyone, but for this exact moment. It wasn't grand in the loud way some homes try to be. It was grand in its quiet, steady way, with its wide porch, its big windows, and a soft golden glow that felt safe even from a distance. When we stopped, he got out first, opened my door, and helped me out as if I hadn't aged a single day, as if I was still the girl he once walked home from school. The air outside smelled clean, fresh, and for the first time since the tornado, I didn't feel like the world was pressing down on me. We walked up the steps together, and as soon as I stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around me. Not just from the air, but from the way everything in that house seemed alive. The crackling of a small fire in the living room, the soft rug beneath my feet, the faint scent of coffee and cedarwood, it all felt like a place where broken pieces could be set down without fear of being swept away. He showed me the guest room, with its big window that looked out onto a still, quiet lake, and I stood there for a moment, just letting the silence hold me. The bed was made with thick, soft blankets, and everything in the room was calm, untouched by the storm. I ran my fingers along the windowsill and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The feeling of being somewhere I didn't have to apologize for existing. That night, I lay in that bed and listened to the rain fade into a whisper outside. And I let my eyes close knowing I didn't have to keep fighting to be let in. I didn't have to beg to be wanted. I was already home, not because of the house itself, but because someone had chosen to make space for me when others wouldn't. The days that followed felt like stepping into a part of life I thought had already passed me by, as if the world had quietly shifted while I slept and decided to give me one more soft place to land. Every morning I woke up to the gentle light spilling through the window that overlooked the lake, and the air carried that calm stillness that only comes when a place has nothing to prove. I found myself breathing easier, the weight that had been pressing on my chest slowly melting into something quieter, something I could carry without it breaking me. He never rushed me to speak. He simply filled the house with quiet kindness, making sure I never felt like a guest, only someone who belonged. It wasn't loud gestures, it was the simple things. The way he set out a warm cup of tea before I even asked. The way he let silence stretch without making it heavy. The way his presence steadied the space around me. One morning while I was sitting by the window, watching the light dance on the water, my phone rang. I didn't have to look at the screen to know who it was. For a moment, I just stared at it resting on the table, feeling that old ache stir inside me again, the one that comes from a wound that never fully closed. When I finally picked it up, his voice came through the line, uncertain, soft in a way that almost sounded rehearsed. He said it was all a misunderstanding, that things had just happened too fast, that I should come back. I sat there holding the phone, listening, not interrupting, not trying to make sense of the sudden change of tone. There was a time when those words would have made me fold, when I would have taken the blame just to keep a place in his life. But not anymore. That night on the porch had changed something deep inside me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the anger speak for me. I just said I heard every word clearly the first time, and there was nothing to misunderstand. I told him I hoped they would be all right, but I wasn't coming back to a door that closed on me when I needed it most. There was a long silence on the other end, the kind that stretches like a tight string. And then the call ended, leaving only the soft hum of the house around me. I set the phone down, and for the first time in a long time, my heart didn't shake. It didn't matter anymore whether he regretted it or not, because I had found a place where I didn't have to fight to be let in. The news came later that evening, a small story about donations being made to rebuild homes for those who lost everything in the storm, and I saw his name next to mine. We hadn't planned to make it public, but kindness has a way of finding its way into the world. I smiled softly, not out of pride, but out of something deeper. The quiet peace of knowing that out of a night that once broke me, something stronger was built. I didn't need his approval, I didn't need their house, and I didn't need to beg for a place at their table. I already had a home, and this time it was built on something that could not be washed away. Some nights now, when the wind moves across the lake and the air grows quiet, I find myself sitting by that window, the same one that once greeted me with soft morning light. And I think about how quickly everything can change. The house I thought would always be my safe place is gone. And the people I thought would catch me when I fell turned away when I needed them most. But what they didn't know was that I still had a strength they couldn't take from me. It wasn't loud or sharp, it lived quietly in my heart, waiting for me to remember who I was before life made me forget. That night at the door was not the end of me. It was the moment I realized I didn't need to stand where love had to be begged for. I found peace where it was freely given, not because anyone owed me anything, but because someone saw me and chose to stay. I've learned that sometimes what looks like the worst moment of your life is really just the path clearing for something better. So I sit here with my hands wrapped around a warm cup, the night soft around me, and I let gratitude settle deeper than the pain ever did. Thank you so much for staying with me till the end of my story. It truly means more than I can ever say. And if this touched your heart even a little, please subscribe and stay with me for more.